see your mother. You were only given one, go see your mother. And you know that you will never have another. Go see your mother, go see your mom.
Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. I'm your host, Sadia. This is my mother, Ima. Hey, Ima.
Hello, my sweetness.
How are you?
So I actually have a chance to wear some of my winter things.
Oh, wonderful. How's the weather in Florida?
Oh, we're suffering so much. It went down to 52 degrees.
Yeah, that's pretty cold. Yeah, it got down to I think 11 or 9 degrees past couple of days.
We can talk about people who think they're suffering, but they're not suffering. It's like, I was joking around with someone one time when I went to a wedding in New York, and she asked me like what the weather was like in Florida, and I go, "Oh, we suffer so much during the wintertime. Sometimes it goes down to 55 degrees." And she says, "Oh, let me get out my vinyl." Well, I was listening to this talk show host tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's a regular like white Anglo. I don't know if he's Protestant or Catholic, but he's a Christian. And he starts this business about it is so hard being a Christian. Go, oh, shut up. You're white Anglo Protestant or Catholic in a Christian country. Majority of the population here is white Anglo Protestant or white Anglo Catholic. I said, you don't know the meaning of the word. I can't believe it.
Right. Maybe it's something they enjoy. I don't know.
Yes, it's so hard being Christian. Right. Oh, God.
Well, I think it's you picked on something very interesting that I want to talk about. Actually, this is more philosophical, so it might be it's more like a Tati thing than an Ima thing. But the concept of suffering, I know saying what is suffering, but you brought up the idea of Christians and suffering, and it's my understanding, and I hope I'm not like talking not just out of turn, but kind of talking like out of ignorance. But that in Christianity, there's the suffering, like the cross to bear, and it's kind of like there's kind of like not a pleasure, but like a purposefulness to that suffering. As for Jews with suffering, we don't want to suffer. We're not trying to suffer, and it's why we talked on a previous podcast episode about that Yiddish statement. Woe is to. Nah, I'm not saying it right. It's not woe is to be a Jew, but something like it was a phrase utilized during the immigration to America.
Yeah, they always used to say it was hard to be a Jew, and that's what people said, that the Rebbe, thank God, came around and turned that around and said, no, it's good to be a Jew.
Yeah, and that's the thing where it's just like some people want to suffer, some people want to feel pain. It gives them a reason to wake up in the morning. It was even funny because I was even talking to somebody recently, and I was pointing out some stuff to them. We were having a conversation, and I was like trying to like make him feel better because it seemed like he like messed up on something. So I said, "Oh, don't worry, it's fine. It happened. It's life." But he said to me, I forgot the exact words, but it was something along the lines of like, yeah, but you have to bear that in mind. You don't want to feel too good about yourself, in a sense where like he wants to feel the negativity because the negativity gives him that sense of motivation, that if he didn't have that negativity, he wouldn't feel so comfortable.
In other words, I'm not going to take any, but it's like realizing that you're not perfect and you have to work to be better.
Yeah.
It gives you the motivation, that impetus to work to improve yourself.
Exactly. And that's the thing where it's the idea of like suffering can be a good thing and an enjoyable thing. If I'm making any sense.
Enjoyable, but the thing that like when they talk about like every cloud has a silver lining, and that we learn through our mistakes or we learn through our misfortunes, and it's not that we, God forbid, look to suffer or God forbid enjoy suffering. but that if you're in a position where you're suffering, it's comforting to know that it's not for nothing, that you're not suffering in vain, that there is something good that's going to come out of this. Something positive is going to come out of this in the end, like once you get through this, that
Well,
you are going to gain, you are going to gain from it. And that helps us to get through hard times. Yeah. I heard your wife in
that's
the
perfect
background.
timing, right? Perfect timing. So my follow-up question then for you is, when you were first becoming a mother and you were first understanding the, I guess, the challenges, what were your initial feelings and how did you overcome any negativity or frustrations?
That's a good question, because I'll tell you the truth. I did not have a good support group. And I didn't have a good support. That's the problem also, as far as being a Bali Tshuva is concerned, that Bali Tshuvas, unless they, not all the time, but frequently, do not have a good support group, and that your family, not being religious, can't understand, number one, why you're having all these children when you can't afford them. Because as far as they're concerned, like this, they don't have as much, how can I say it? An Orthodox Jew or a Bali Jew, they have the power, the power of, it's called the something of your conviction, the proof of the power of your conviction. Is that it?
I don't really
The
know.
terms I'm looking for. You have a lot of faith that you are doing the right thing that you're supposed to do by having kids, and whether or not you can afford them is really not the eker. It's not like the idea. The idea is that you have faith that you're doing the right thing, bringing kids into the world, and that things will work out and God will help you. God will not give you a child. God doesn't put any creature on this earth that he does not provide for. And you can look at nature and see that. Okay, it might not be steak every night. It might be tuna and macaroni every night. But don't worry, things do work, and you will be able to provide for that child and provide for yourself. Things will work out. And a lot of non-religious Jews, unfortunately, don't have what's called the courage of your conviction. That's the phrase I'm looking for. And a lot of non-religious Jews don't have the courage in fact, every now and then you do come across, I hate to say it, I've come across Orthodox Jews. I hate to say Orthodox. It's not, I don't like put Jews in.
Well, maybe
Jews, like Torah observant Jews, who also seem to lack that courage of their convictions.
Maybe it's not necessarily because now we're tapping into something else. Because you seem to be talking a lot about, like, well, religious people do this, non-religious people do that. Religious people seem to be doing things better, and then non-religious people don't. But now we're seeing, as you're talking, that it's not non-religious or religious. It's more of this mindset of positivity, where there's this hope that things will get better, and there's a way to meditate on these things and these frustrations and these sufferings, and therefore be able to elevate them. And it might, true, I just like I agree with you, to a point of, the idea of following Hashem's commandments, the Torah, mitzvos, is the ideal way of life. It's what I believe in. It's why I do it, but other people have their own ways of life. And if it works for them, that's up to them. Whatever they're going through is what they're going through. But I think what we're talking about is the mentality of accepting suffering in a positive manner and elevating it, comparatively letting it bring you down. And I think that's just a mentality, not necessarily I don't want to say not necessarily a religious thing, but it's not only to religious people or Jewish people. It just depends on the mentality. And we could talk about what Judaism brings to the table and what we utilize with Judaism and the teachings of Judaism to help us with our suffering and overcoming our strife. But to go ahead and say it's only this, that, and the other, almost like a black and white, way of thinking, I just don't think makes sense. You know what I mean?
I think you've got a very good point there. But the thing is, I was reflecting on, like, I mean, our parents helped us out. They really did as much as they could. But it was like how can I say it? The psychological support, the emotional support wasn't there. I mean, they helped us out. They were good to us. They helped us out.
What did you wish they were going to say and do?
Wish? I don't know.
No, like if you say they didn't do certain things, then I'd like to know some specifics. Like, what do you wish they said and did?
Well, had they been, say, like, when I look at friends of mine who come from religious households, they can always depend on, like, going to their parents' house for Shabbos and Yontif. They had that that safety net, and that helped a lot. And their parents like gave them a lot of emotional support. Like, also my mother helped babysit. My mother did. She did help me. She babysat. It was really nice of her. But it was like as far as kashrus and things were concerned, like, she kept a certain degree of kosher, but it's not like I could go over there for Shabbos or Yom Tov.
You couldn't depend on them religiously, and that's the frustration was.
Right. Like, I was one time I was talking to one of your sisters, and she was talking about all her friends. This is when she was, I think, like, I don't know how old she was, maybe 8 or 9, maybe 10. All her friends go to their grandparents for Shabbos and Yom Tov, and she can't go to her grandparents. Like, we can't go to our grandparents for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And I said, when you get married and have your own family, it's going to be a lot easier for you, because your father and I, being Torah observant Jews, you can always come to us for Shabbos and Yom Tov.
Yeah.
So, and that does help a lot.
It's interesting because it's like, and this is where I find it, to me, fascinating, but it's also very frustrating. I mentioned a while ago, I was watching this TV show with Steve Carell. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but basically it was about this therapist, Reformed Jewish therapist, who was talking about his son who became Orthodox. And he was talking about how frustrated he was that his son brought his own food to the Shabbos table because he couldn't trust his mother's kashrus. And the anger and frustration that him and his wife had with what his son was doing as a disrespect. But let's just zoom out a little bit and let's try to make this more mechanical. If somebody has certain laws they need to abide by, whether they take upon themselves one way or the other, and they're being polite about it, they're being respectful about it, they're telling you, hey, I need A, B, and C, and they just need to do those three, 4 things, whatever. It's a little inconvenience to you, but they'll take care of all the other inconvenience because they don't want to bother you. There's no reason to be upset about it. Which I think what I can understand, at least I've noticed, growing up Orthodox and having a lot of non-Orthodox family, is that there seemed to be some sense of a lot of anger and spite to the rules and regulations that if it was any other culture, they would totally be okay with it and be respectful for it.
Good point.
It's a weird thing where it's just like
for you, not to interrupt, but what was that like for you? You just like struck something. From your point of view, growing up like as a little boy, what was that like for you to have parents that were Torah observant and grandparents and aunts and uncles that were not?
I understood it immediately. I understood the concept immediately. My father and mother are religious. My parents, my grandparents, and my aunts are not. And it wasn't like a shocker or hard to grasp. It was very immediate. Okay, that's just a boundary we just don't cross. And we're just not doing it. Now, if you're going to dive a little deeper, I found it frustrating where some of my aunts were, I could tell, even at like 6, 7, 8, they definitely showed some animosity towards Orthodoxy whether they were trying to be subtle about it or not, you know. And because so many people around me at the time talked about those animosities very openly, like, oh, non-Orthodox Jews just have issues with Orthodoxy, that it hurt me, but I wasn't shocked. And I didn't think it was a big deal, but it was something more of like, and I say this all the time to people: if a dog barks, you get mad at the dog. Like, that's just what they do. So it's just like, oh, or not. Growing up seeing this, I'm like, oh, just not Orthodox people just have issues with Orthodoxy. That's just what they do.
I remember one time having an argument with my mother when I was first becoming from, and she was like, why can't you eat in my house? Why do you not turn on lights of Shabbos? You know, why do you do this way? And I said to her, what are you getting on my case for? I said, I didn't write the book. And so she says to me, yeah, but you're following the book.
And it's like this, it's a weird, ignorant, and I have to say ignorant people, and they'll get offended by it, and people are going to get pissed about it, whatever, I don't care. But it's like you have to understand there's in Orthodoxy, and this is where it's like I try to take away the word Orthodoxy and try to take it to just practicing Judaism.
Yeah.
We have the idea of Moses received the Torah from Hashem at Sinai. He gave it to Yoshua, who gave it to the Zakanim, who gave it to the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, and we have a long history of unbroken and written law that we have to abide by. Now, in those oral and written laws, there are gray areas, there are stringencies that some hold, and there are just no-go zones. A simple no-go zone that every Jew, non-Jew knows is you don't eat pork. You just don't. You just don't. Because Hashem said so, that's it. So going a little deeper, we could talk about Shabbos. And it says that you're not supposed to work on Shabbos. So some people take it literally and say, oh, I'm just not going to work on Shabbos, but I'll turn on the TV. I'll go ahead and drive my car. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't work on Shabbos because, you know, I'm a Jew and Jews don't work on Shabbos. Where that's respectful, in my opinion. That's respectable. And it's the right thing to do. Just again, but let's go dive into the laws here then. Okay. Well, how do you practice Shabbos if it says don't work? What does that mean? And we have oral traditions and written laws and oral laws about breaking down the laws of Shabbos. And so, again, some laws you just don't do. For instance, you don't light a fire. You don't build something permanent. So that being said, electricity has its own decisive, this is the gray area, because electricity, you know, different rabbis hold different things. Some hold that it's a connection and you're building something permanent, which could be a total Isser D'Oraisa, which means a written, a Torah law that you can't break. And then others go further down into the electricity of how it's more of a non-permanent connection, and it goes into deep. I don't want to get too much into the details because it's.
Well, I heard something once that when electricity, the light bulb first became available to, electricity first became available to the population, that the way it was originally explained to the Rebbeim was explained like water. Like water comes from the water station where it had been purified. You just turn on the faucet and it comes through. So at that time, they poskined that you could turn on electricity because that's the way it was explained to them. Then later on, they found out, no, it's a spark.
So that's interesting you say that.
And then when they realized that, then that's when they poskined, hey, that you could not use electricity, on Shabbos. But I remember as a kid hearing my grandparents talk, and unfortunately, they were not educated Jews. And my grandfather saying, oh, well, the reason you couldn't ride on Shabbos years ago was because you had to take the horse out of the barn and you had to hitch the horse to the carriage or put the bridle on and the saddle. And that was a lot of work. So that's why Jews didn't ride on Shabbos. But now we have a car. We don't go through all that. We just put a key in the ignition and that's it. So it's not considered really work. But they didn't understand a malacha is not technically work. A malacha is a chemical or physical change. And I remember when I went to Minnesota and finally studied about malachas and Hilchos Shabbos, and I remember coming back home very, very excited and telling my parents, guess what? I said, when it says not to work on Shabbos, it's not talking about work. It's talking about making a chemical or physical change. And this is why we don't ride in the car on Shabbos. And they were like, what? Because the way they were raised, also, they weren't, really that Jewishly educated, was that, years ago in Europe, you had to chop wood, and you had to do this, and you had to do that. But now it's nothing. We just turn on the stove and we get, so therefore it's not really work. Because they were thinking in terms of work, like effort. They weren't thinking in terms of a chemical or physical change.
So I have a question then. I have a question. Why didn't your family become more religious once you became more religious?
That's a very good question. I think what it is too, I think it's a matter of, first of all, being set in your ways. I think there's also a fear, because I remember you talk to a lot of people who become Bali Chuvas, and they said that before they made that commitment, there was like a fear of taking on a Torah way of life, because it was, I don't know if it's fear of the unknown, especially if you have a business that's opened on Shabbos, or you work in a business where the majority of the money is made on Shabbos. And here for years, you've had this business. So it's like you're scared. You really are. You're afraid to take that leap because, okay, what if I close my business on Shabbos? Now, how is my family going to live? I make the majority of my money on Shabbos. What's going to happen with my family? How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to, feed my family? And there is that fear of, of having faith in God, and like it's called leap of faith. As I think of, was it Kierkegaard, the famous German philosopher, talked about a leap of faith. That there is that leap of faith that people are afraid to take initially. But it's like jumping into a pool. You know what I mean? When you just say, I'm going to do it, when you do it, you look back, you go, wow, what was I afraid of? That it all worked out. There's a very famous story. There was a man, named Moshe Schloss was his name. He was not only an artist, but he owned a natural foods restaurant in the middle of Manhattan. And in fact, it became a very famous restaurant. In fact, it was in a movie. They actually filmed a movie in it, and he had a small part in the movie. The movie was called Joe, and it was about this redneck guy who forms a friendship with this very high-class executive type guy, very intellectual type executive type guy. And Joe is an ordinary working stiff. So the executive type guy wants to show him like a little taste of his way of life. So he takes Joe to this natural foods restaurant, and they're sitting at the table, and Joe's looking at the menu. He says, hey, can I get a steak around here? And the waiter says to him, sir, this is a natural foods restaurant. And that was Moshe Schloss that was there, that was taking the part of the waiter, saying that line to him. So I was listening to a talk that Moshe Schloss gave about his transition to becoming a Torah observant Jew and becoming a Lubavitcher Chassid. And he said that when he made that decision to close his restaurant on Shabbos, it was a very, very scary, serious decision. And when he decided to notify his customers that this restaurant will be closing, say 3:00 in the afternoon Friday, and we will open the wintertime, say like Saturday night, like 9:00 or something. or during the summertime, we will not open till Sunday afternoon. So there were two men that came over to him. One man was Jewish, the other man was not. And the man that was Jewish was really irritated and said, "Don't you think you owe it to your customers to stay open?" And Moshe said to him, "Sir, you are welcome to come to this restaurant during the winter, from any time until Friday at 3. And in the wintertime, Saturday night at 10 or 9 at 10, whatever it was opening. And during the summertime, Sunday afternoon." And so the young person, the gentleman who was not Jewish, said to the Jewish man, "Wait a minute now." He said, "I really admire him." He's talking to Moshe. He said not to the Jew, he said to the Jewish man who was contending with Moshe Shloss. He said, "You've got to really admire this man." He says he has the courage of his convictions, and he's following that courage of that convictions to follow the precepts of his religion. And I think that's very admirable. So Moshe Shloss said that after he did that, after he decided to close his restaurant on Shabbos, the 6 other restaurants that were in that area all closed down, all went out of business.
Wow.
And his was the only one that was still there.
So it's a cute story.
Yeah.
But I think it's just like, I think it's also, we were just talking about electricity. We're going on a good pace, and I was trying to really stick with that topic because the main point I was trying to make was just as complicated electricity is, that's how complicated understanding Orthodoxy and understanding Judaism is, and deciding whether to be practicing or not is always, that struggle, because there's always this gray area. You don't know if it's right or wrong. And it's that constant struggle of figuring out what that gray area is to find that black and white, if it's making any sense.
Well, we always do. I mean, how many times have you done something and said, "Wait a minute, is this permissible on Shabbos? Or is this permissible kashrus wise, whatever?" And that's what a shaila is. You have a shaila, and you go to your rav, your local Orthodox rabbi who you hold by, to find the answer. We're talking about electricity. Remember today we were talking about that disaster that happened in France in the late 1800s.
What exactly
Remember
happened?
electricity?
Oh,
yeah. There's on YouTube. There's these documentaries called Fascinating Horror, which is the history of famous world disasters. And so there was a horrible thing that happened in France in like the 1890s, where there was this big charity bazaar, and this big charity bazaar, they had all these like interesting state-of-the-art scientific and artistic things on display. And one of the things they had was the first movies that were made, like the 1890s. And so what happened was the light bulb in the projector went out, because in those days light bulbs had gas, and the gas would, if the gas ran out, you could pump the gas back into the light bulb. Well, the gas that they used was ether. And so the guy running the projector asked his assistant, "Please light a match so I can see how to put the ether in the light bulb."
God. Yep.
I mean,
that's what happened.
Today we're laughing about that, but it was horrible. I mean, 100 people were killed because of this idiot. But light the match while I put the ether in the light bulb.
God. Oh, wow. That's where the concept of, the understanding the invention and the destruction that it makes is just out of sheer ignorance is the funniest thing.
But ether.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I knew ether was volatile. I hated the word ether, because when I had my first eye operation, in those days they used ether, and all I knew was it was disastrous. I mean, ether was it smelled horrible, and it made you nauseous. You were throwing up for days. When you came out of the anesthesia, it was really bad. So when I was a kid, one of the first words I learned about was ether.
How did you feel with those surgeries when you were a kid?
Terrified, horrible. And hospital personnel in those days were not very sympathetic to child psychology, like some big person in a white outfit with a mask on their face coming over to me and tearing me out of my mother's arms and carrying me away screaming, and my mother smiling and waving, and then taking me to the operating room, kicking and screaming, and then putting me on the operating table, and my eye doctor in her surgery garb comes over. Hi, go, who are you? She goes, you know me, I'm Dr. Small. I go, no, you're not, you're a monster. And so she said, now we're going to play a game. I want you to lay down on the table and I want you to close your eyes, count to 10 and go, whoopsie do. And I go, so I don't know if it was a doctor, but somebody comes up behind me. Come on, I don't have time for this. Grabs me, bang, throws me on the table, takes the mask, boom, puts it over my face.
Oh God, holy crap.
Let's put it this way. By that time, Dr. Benjamin Spock's book had been written, but I don't think too many of them read it.
I think people didn't want to accept it. Like this whole idea right now of like gentle parenting, has its own, like it's hard to figure out because people are getting confused between gentle parenting and permissive parenting.
Absolutely. And it's nothing new.
Really?
We've discussed this a few times.
Oh yeah, we talked this at length.
About friends of mine who went to these therapists. Oh, you must not yell. You must not hit the child. You must not. In the meantime, the kid is acting like a holy terror and getting away with everything.
Yeah, we'll use belt therapy. We'll figure out what's going on. But I want to circle back a little bit about about what it was like growing up with non-religious grandparents and aunts. And I want to say that like it was always kind of weird in a sense that like and kind of frustrating and sad, but I couldn't do anything about it, so I never really talked about it. But I couldn't really have a grandparent.
Yeah.
You know, like I also it's just like I think all of us were a bunch of wild children anyways that I feel that maybe the grandparents were a little overwhelmed by. So it was very hard for them to be grandparents to us. So we never really had that opportunity to have like a classic grandparent situation. And that's something that I kind of, felt that like I missed out on in life. It's not too bad. It just is what it is, but it's just an interesting concept.
Not having non-religious grandparents, it wasn't like you could come to them with problems that you were maybe having in yeshiva.
No, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. It was just the relationship, like the idea and the concept of, having having an understanding that someone's willing to want to spend time with you. And I know they did. I'm not saying they didn't.
But
it was.
But I remember that time that you lost that $20 that you were supposed to you wanted to use $20 I think to have your bike fixed, something like that. And when you went over, you found the $20 had fallen out of your pocket. And I told you, I'm sorry. I said we didn't have a lot of money. I said I don't have another $20 bill. I'm sorry. And you thought you said you got upset. You said, why are you punishing me? I said, we're not punishing you. We're not.
I don't remember this.
Said, everyone loses money. I've lost money. Tati said, yeah. Tati was there. Tati said, yeah, I lost money. Everyone loses money. But unfortunately, we don't have another $20 to give you. We're very sorry. I was talking to Bubby Rena called shortly after that, and I told her about the situation. And remember, she goes,
"Oh,
send
I remember.
him over here.
Now I remember. Yeah,
trim my hedges, and I'll pay him $20."
Yeah, no, and again, it's just like it was just. That's why I wanted to preface it with like I understand like they were there when they could be. I was just saying the feelings that I had growing up, that like, and I think looking back, like you're right. I think spending time Friday night, if we would go to Bubby and Zadie's every Friday night for Shabbos, that would definitely change my mentality, my mindset, my thought process.
The dynamics. Yeah.
The dynamics. I think the dynamics were like I was one of, thank God, many kids, but then again, I was one of in a sea of many grandkids and like we just, we're little wild childs. So
Any grandkids? My parents, they only had 3. There was my each of my sisters only had 1 child.
no, but that's not my point. We, as in our family of, thank God, a certain amount of people, which was a lot, were the wild child grandkids that were overwhelming to my grandparents. So I'm not saying they whatever. I'm just saying with that energy and combined with the lack of lack of enjoyable not enjoyable moments, but lack of events to be around each other daily, weekly, the connections are not as strong as the people that were there daily and weekly.
See what you mean? Yeah.
So yes, I remember you would take us to Bubby and Zadie's every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I'd spend time with them. But again, it wasn't a sit-down meal, Shabbos meal. We would hang out and do stuff. It was more of like Bubby was middle of doing cooking or doing the dishes. Zadie was watching the O's game. And I was sifting through the newspapers to read the comics. Like, it's just a different type, like it was the moment. And maybe like me personally, I always want more from spending time with people. I always feel like I want a deeper, stronger, more intense connection.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Basically, like, these were not the type of grandparents you could spend Shabbos and Yom Tov with. And that you're right. You're absolutely right. Had you had grandparents that you could actually spend Shabbos and Yom Tov with, then it would have
but I feel like
it would have made the connection a lot stronger. You're right.
Well, yeah, but I feel like the way you're wording it sounds like it sounds negative, and I'm not trying to say it, and I don't believe it's negative. I think it's a situation in hand.
It was what the situation was.
Yes.
Well, that's something to think about, though, is think of how many like Chabad Shluchim are miles and miles away from their families, and their children see their grandparents like once in a blue moon. I've had friends. You saw that in Baltimore growing up, that there were people like from Iran, from Israel, who their kids saw their grandparents like once every 3 or 4 years or something, when the grandparents would get enough money to be able to come over and visit them in the United States. Yeah.
And I think that's why I'm lucky with what I have. It was just an experience, and then that's all I was talking about. I'm not spiteful of my experience. I don't regret it. I wish I spent more time with my grandparents. I wish I, asked them more questions. It was more, and I lived more in the moment with them. But I was an 8, 9, and 10-year-old kid who just was being a 9, 10-year-old kid.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And that's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, what about? I know we're almost out of time, but like, can you tell me a little bit about like spending time with your grandparents and what you enjoyed?
Well, there was my Zadie with the Ting story.
Oh, yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm saying, like, more of a day-to-day situation.
One time I was sleeping over my mother's parents' house, and I was real little, and I woke up early in the morning. I came over to their bedroom. I opened up the door, and my bubby looked at me from the bed and jokingly went, "Boo!"
That's awesome.
My mother's parents were they were very, very lighthearted. You might say they're very lighthearted people. My father's parents. I remember my grandmother spending some really nice time. I remember my grandmother sitting with me and reciting all these.
Thank you for listening to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. Please comment and subscribe on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and Instagram. I would greatly appreciate it, and my mother would too.